Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father. This is 40 years later, by the way. Moses is now 80. Moses was tending, so he was a prince of Egypt for 40 years. Now he's been a shepherd in Midian for 40 years. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. He's not particularly startled by the appearance of the bush on fire. Bushfires wouldn't have been that uncommon a sight to him. It surprises him, as he says here in a moment, or so Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. The sight of the sight of the bush on fire was not strange to him. The sight of the bush on fire but not burning up was strange to him. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, so the Lord has Moses' attention, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Every place really is ultimately holy ground. Anywhere that God is holy ground. At this moment in time, God is in this burning bush, so this area is holy ground. But God could be anywhere at any time. God is everywhere at all times. So by that standard, everywhere is holy ground. Any place that God may be. But again, this is part of the unfolding revelation of God. Jacob, back when he had his dream about the staircase leading up to heaven, thought that was holy ground. That was the connecting point between God and earth. Now, here is at this bush. God is not limited to a specific spot or a physical place or location. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Either he tucked his head under his cloak or something, or he fell face down on the ground, or else he turned away. I don't think he would necessarily turn away because that would be showing disrespect, but he did something to hide himself. So he knows about this God. He's heard about this God. This is his first encounter with this God, though. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. He said a long time ago that he was going to do this, and now it's time to be done. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now, go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Now, this had been going on for a while. Again, I said at the beginning of this day, the day of lessons, that I don't know exactly how long it had been going on for. We often think of them being slaves for 400 years. That's actually not true. They weren't slaves for 400 years. They weren't even in Egypt for 400 years. They were in Egypt for 210 years. And they weren't slaves for all that time. At least the first 70 years that Joseph was still alive, they weren't slaves. So they were slaves for most 150 years, and possibly less than that. Probably less than that. But they were at least slaves for 80 years, because Moses is 80 here, and they've been slaves since before his birth. So let's say 100, or maybe a little more than 100 years. But they've been slaves for a while, so that's 100 plus years. And again, that's time for a couple of generations to come and go, and knowing nothing but slavery. So why did God allow that to stay that way? I mean, he told Abraham back in Genesis 15 that his descendants would get the land, but not until after they've been down in the land, in another land, it would be mistreated and enslaved, and the 400 years of wandering around as strangers in these strange lands before it became theirs. Well, he said back in Genesis 15 that at that time the sin of the Amorites had not yet reached its full measure. Amorites are one of the people groups mentioned here. It's time for them to come back out. In God's own time, it's time for them to come back out. It wasn't time for them to go in to take the land when Abraham first got there and lived there as a wanderer. But now it is time for the Hebrews to come out of Egypt as a people, as a nation, not as a family, not as an extended family anymore, but as a nation, to come out of Egypt, to punish Egypt, and to take the land of Canaan. In God's timetable and His providence, it's time for that to happen. Now, the conditions have been met. I'm not even sure, honestly, God exists outside of time. Now, He knows what it's like to live within time, because when Jesus Christ lived in a physical body on earth, He lived within the confines of time. So God knows what it's like to live within time. God created time. God exists outside of time. So the flow of time does not have a hold on God. I'm not even sure if God arranges His plans according to time like we do. I think God arranges His plans according to conditions. When certain conditions are met, then He acts. I'm not even sure if God necessarily makes His plans based on time like we do, like a schedule on time. We talk about God's timetable and the things that God does in His own time. But I'm not entirely certain if He actually arranges His plans based on time, or more just now it's the conditions have been right, God is going to take an action. The conditions were not correct in the 400 years or 100 years ago, but they are now. Things have gotten to the point where it's time where God is now going to act. Now Moses said, God lets people go on their own way for a while before He does something about it. Okay? God does not force any of us to do what He wants us to do. But there is going to, and He will let us go off and do our own thing for a while. But there is going to come a point where He will say something. Well, He will have something to say about it. If we set ourselves against Him, if we decide to do things that are against what He wants us to do, He will let us do that. But He will get, for a while, but He will get to a point where He finally says, no, I'm done with this. There's not going to be any more of this. If we deny Him, if we refuse Him, if we refuse to follow Him, He will at some point bring the judgment against us. He won't do it right away. And each of us individually, and as on an individual level, and on a national level, community level, we get who knows how long. Some of us seem to get more time than others. Later on, when we get down to the kings, we're going to read about a guy named Manasseh, who was the most wicked king of Judah, of all of them. And he was also the longest reigning king of Judah. He reigned for 55 years. He ended up repenting, believe it or not. One of the few times, I think, about as far as the kings go, the only time, we ever read about one of these wicked kings repenting. But he did. He was the most wicked. He was also the longest reigning. And he actually ended up repenting in the end. His successor, whose name I'm actually forgetting at the moment, there was a lot of them, only reigned for 2 years, and then he was discarded. He was gone. So he didn't get 55 years to change his mind. He was a wicked king too. He didn't get 55 years to change his mind and repent. He only got 2. Some of us get 55 years. Some of us get 2. Some of us didn't even get 2 years. I don't know. Okay, I don't know how that goes. I don't know how God makes that determination. Another example, a non-Israelite example. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, reigned for over 40 years. He eventually was humbled. He was humbled by God, and eventually acknowledged God's supremacy. I don't know if he ever became a real believer in God, but we read in Daniel 4 about him finally acknowledging the real God. He had to receive several harsh lessons over the years, but he finally did do it. Then in Daniel 5, we read about a guy, Nebuchadnezzar's grandson actually, Belshazzar, who did not reign 40 years and did not acknowledge himself, humble himself before God, and was overthrown in one night while he was having a party in this palace of Babylon. I'm not sure exactly how old he was, but he couldn't have been very old. In fact, his reign was so unimportant in comparison to the other kings of his time that we, history, forgot about him for thousands of years. When the Greeks came along and took over the old empire, Persian Empire, Persia, of course, conquered Babylon. In fact, that night that Belshazzar dies is the night that Persia conquers Babylon. A couple hundred years later, the Greeks come along and conquer Persia. And when they try to just sort through the history of all these conquered nations they've inherited, they don't even know about Belshazzar. So for 2,000 plus years, we didn't know about Belshazzar. That's how unimpressive he was compared to the reigns of the kings before and after him. For some reason, he didn't get 40 plus years to repent and humble himself before God. God knew that he wasn't going to do it, I guess, in those 40 years. Nebuchadnezzar finally did. Belshazzar, I guess, was never going to, and God cut it off before it could get any worse. I don't know. I'm not in a position to make those determinations. I'm not God. I am not in a position to say how long each person gets, or each country or nation gets, before they get to repent before the judgment comes. But the judgment will eventually come. As we go on with this, we're going to be reading about the day of the Lord, the concept of the day the Lord comes in judgment, and that can happen on an individual basis, a community basis, a family basis, a national basis. The day of the Lord is basically the day the Lord comes. It doesn't necessarily just refer to the second coming as we call it today. That will be a day of the Lord. The second coming of Christ will be a day of the Lord. But there are many days of the Lord that have occurred and continue to occur throughout history, when the Lord comes in judgment on a nation or a people, or even on an individual basis. In one of these days, whether it happens at this actual second coming of Christ or we die before that, each of us is going to have to face the day of the Lord. Now, for those who are ready for it, the day of the Lord is a day of deliverance and salvation. For those who are not, it's a day of judgment and condemnation. The Israelites are ready for the day of the Lord. For them, it's going to be a day of deliverance and salvation. The Pharaohs are not ready for the day of the Lord. For them, it's going to be a day of condemnation and judgment. But Moses said to God, Moses is not certain about this. He's had 80 years to think over his life, and he doesn't consider himself capable of pulling this off. Who am I? Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? He tried that once. He had an aborted attempt to take over way back 40 years ago, and that didn't work out too well, did it? And God said, I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. The Hebrew you there is plural, it says in my footnotes. Yeah, she's been all over the place this morning. What? What is your problem? Moses said to God, now this is a big one here. Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, what are you looking at? Just calm down. Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? God said to Moses, I'm sorry, this cat is just, she is in a mood today, and I'm just constantly being distracted by her. I don't want her to knock over this camera. That's the thing. It's like I'm trying to make sure she can run around all she wants, but I don't want her to knock over this camera. So I'm trying to keep an eye on her so that if she gets close, I can shield the camera from her destructive ways. God said to Moses, wait, where am I? There I am. I am who I am, or I will be who I will be. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, this requires a follow-up answer, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your, this is the capital letter Lord, so that's that Yahweh idea that, or we pronounce it as Yahweh. The God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name by which I am to be remembered from generation to generation. Okay, well, I have been called away. I am not going to be able to continue with this for now, just so you know. I'm going to have to wrap this up for today right now, earlier than I expected. So just so everybody knows that this day is done for now. I have just finished talking about, or reading through the verse where God reveals his name to Moses. And there is, that's actually not a bad ending spot, because there is a great deal to discuss. A great deal to discuss with that verse and with that name. So we'll go ahead and leave that there for now.